Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents DBT Made Simple, a step-by-step guide to dialectical behavior therapy by Sheri Van Dijk, MSW, narrated by Randye, Kaye. Publisher's note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type DBT Made Simple into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page. Then, under the Supplemental Content section, please enter the access code GOAL, G-O-A-L, and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All diagrams, charts, worksheets, quizzes, diaries, tables, forms, and lists referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. Introduction: What to expect. In 1980, Marsha Linehan, a psychologist in the United States, was working with her team to find more effective ways of treating suicidal behavior, a focus that she later narrowed to borderline personality disorder, BPD. BPD, an illness characterized by difficulties regulating emotions, often causes impulsivity, including suicide attempts and other self-harming behaviors. Traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, didn't seem very helpful in treating BPD, and because the consequences of the illness can be so severe, Dr. Linehan and her team continued to work on developing new strategies to help individuals with BPD. This result was dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. The purpose of this book. Although DBT was originally designed to treat BPD, it has been found to be helpful for all sorts of other disorders. In fact, we now know that it's quite helpful for anyone with problems regulating emotions, even if the cause isn't related to a psychiatric illness. Because of its success in helping people learn to manage their emotions more effectively, DBT has become a highly sought-after treatment. Unfortunately, there are still too few therapists sufficiently trained in DBT, given the number of people looking for this form of help for their problems. So the main purpose of this book is to provide therapists with a basic understanding of the theory underlying DBT, the strategies used in individual sessions that make it stand out from traditional CBT, and the DBT skills themselves. This book is not meant in any way, shape, or form as an attempt to duplicate the extraordinary work of Marsha Linehan. Her work has been invaluable to the field of psychotherapy in many ways. Rather, my hope is to make DBT more accessible to therapists who may be intimidated by it, thus making DBT more available to clients who would benefit from this treatment. Who this book is written for. If you are a therapist new to DBT, this book will provide you with everything you need to use the model to treat people with problems involving emotion dysregulation. For therapists whose goal is to learn how to provide DBT for individuals with BPD, this book will be a good start. But in the long run, you'll need to read Linehan's seminal text, Cognitive Behavioral Treatment of Borderline Personality Disorder. If you've already received training in DBT and use it in your practice, this book will be a good review and will also provide some helpful suggestions and handouts. In addition, this book will help you use DBT for mental illnesses other than BPD and will provide you with different ways of thinking about and teaching DBT skills to clients. If you're new to DBT, I suggest that you listen to this book cover to cover before you start using the treatment with your clients. It's important that you have a good understanding of the DBT skills before you try to teach them. It's also important for you to have a good idea of how you wish to use DBT. Will you be using it only with BPD, only with other mental illnesses, or both? If you're just learning the model and your intention is to use it with both types of clients, I suggest that you practice with clients who don't have BPD first. as there are many more strategies and techniques you need to learn to use this treatment effectively with BPD clients. You'll probably want to do more training and reading before you start using the model with clients with BPD. It is also extremely helpful for therapists to actually use the DBT skills themselves in their own personal and professional lives. This will not only help with your own learning, but also allow you to say that you practice what you preach. It's difficult to teach others something if you're not doing it yourself. Can you imagine trying to teach someone how to ride a bike or drive a car if you only knew the theory behind it and didn't actually ride a bike or drive a car regularly yourself? Who DBT works for. In my opinion, DBT can be effective for most clients. In my own practice, I've used DBT skills to help clients deal with bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, bulimia and binge eating disorder, chronic pain, grief, low self-esteem, relationship issues, and anger. Of course, like any therapy, DBT won't work for everyone. But in my years of using this treatment modality, I've learned that outside of treating borderline personality disorder, DBT can be a very flexible treatment modality. You can pick and choose which pieces of DBT you believe will be effective for different clients. For many clients with illnesses other than personality disorders, you may use only the DBT skills, and you may find that some of these clients only need some of the skills. For example, some clients won't actually need distress tolerance or interpersonal effectiveness skills because they are already well adapted in these ways, but they still need skills to help them be more mindful and to manage their emotions more effectively. For clients with traits associated with personality disorders, you may decide to incorporate some of the learning theory DBT uses in individual sessions, as well as teaching some or all of the skills. The bottom line is that when you're not using DBT to treat BPD, the treatment is very flexible and can be used for any disorder. In Chapter 1, we'll take a look at some of the research on using DBT for disorders other than BPD. The format of this book. This book is divided into two parts. In Part 1, the foundation, you'll learn about the theory that underlies the treatment model, how DBT differs from traditional CBT, and what the full DBT model entails. I'll also review some of the research on the use of DBT in the treatment of BPD and other disorders. Part 1 will also focus on delivering the therapy in individual sessions. You'll learn about many of the techniques that are necessary in treating BPD due to the complexity of this illness and the problems therapists often encounter in developing and maintaining a good therapeutic alliance with these clients. These skills can also be useful but aren't always necessary in developing a good therapeutic relationship with clients without the same emotional dysregulation and interpersonal problems as clients with BPD. In Part 2, the skills, you'll learn the actual DBT skills and how to teach them to your clients. Whereas Part 1 focuses on the model more as it is applied to BPD, Part 2 focuses on helping therapists use DBT skills with a broader client population. Throughout this book, you'll find handouts to help you teach clients these skills, along with examples of therapist-client dialogues to help you put all of these strategies and skills into practice. One of the points that Linehan emphasizes in her textbook is that therapists are fallible. Keep this in mind as you listen to this book. Yes, you want to understand the strategies and skills as thoroughly as possible. Yes, you want to be as effective as you can be in your sessions. And yes, you are going to make mistakes and have problems implementing the strategies and teaching the skills. As therapists, we all need to learn to tolerate this thought, just as we teach our clients to tolerate their unpleasant and distressing thoughts. This book will help you become a more knowledgeable and confident DBT therapist. So, keeping this thought in mind, welcome to DBT Made Simple. Part 1. The Foundation. Chapter 1. The Basics of DBT. Since the middle of the 20th century, psychotherapy has essentially gone through 3 evolutions: the development of behavior therapy in the 1950s, Aaron Beck's development of cognitive therapy in the 1970s, and a merging of these 2 therapies into the well-known and most used contemporary treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy. The last 10 to 15 years has seen the rising of a 3rd wave of cognitive and behavior therapy, incorporating mindfulness and acceptance techniques. Dialectical behavior therapy is one of these 3rd-wave therapies and has been proven highly effective in the treatment of patients with borderline personality disorder who have difficulties regulating their emotions. What is DBT? DBT is a form of CBT. Palmer refers to it as a strange hybrid of a number of different therapies and techniques. Many people have asked me how DBT and CBT differ. I usually respond that, in terms of the skills, DBT is really just CBT using a different language, with the addition of mindfulness and acceptance techniques. DBT takes the judgment out of CBT so that the way clients are thinking isn't wrong, erroneous, or distorted, with the goal being to change their way of thinking. Instead, DBT acknowledges that there is a problem with the way clients think, but the therapist first encourages clients to accept this rather than judge it, and then helps them look at how they can make changes so that their thinking is more balanced. However, looking at the entire model of DBT rather than just the skills reveals that this treatment is quite different from CBT. The main distinction is that DBT is a principle-driven therapy, whereas CBT tends to be a protocol-based therapy. In CBT, the therapist follows specific procedures. For example, when a client presents with panic attacks, a certain set of rules or procedures are followed to treat the panic, such as providing psychoeducation, teaching abdominal breathing, and so on. In DBT, the therapist is instead guided by principles, allowing the therapist to be more flexible. This is crucial in treating people who have difficulties managing their emotions, and specifically those with a diagnosis of BPD, since these clients often face a variety of problems, making it difficult to focus on just one issue in each session. When a client is experiencing a variety of problems, starting to follow a highly structured treatment protocol that targets just one of these problems is almost impossible and would probably be perceived by the client as invalidating. A second major difference between DBT and CBT is in how treatment is delivered. CBT can be provided in either a group or individual format, but rarely occurs in both simultaneously, whereas DBT consists of 4 different modes of therapy: individual therapy, skills groups, telephone consultation, and the therapy team, each of which will be outlined later in this chapter. Like CBT, DBT incorporates self-monitoring. However, it's taken to a different level in DBT with the use of behavior tracking sheets. DBT also differs from CBT in the way individual sessions are structured, addressing behaviors and stages of treatment in a hierarchy determined by the severity and threat of target behaviors. DBT is also distinguished by its use of a suicide risk and assessment protocol. Above and beyond the delivery of treatment, the use of the therapeutic relationship in DBT is based on learning theory and quite distinct from the approach in CBT. Because DBT is a behaviorally focused treatment, the therapist views BPD as a pattern of learned behaviors. To help clients unlearn these destructive behaviors, the DBT model emphasizes the importance of identifying the triggers for dysfunctional behaviors and the contingencies that are maintaining these behaviors. To facilitate this, the DBT therapist makes every effort to develop a deep and genuine therapeutic alliance with the client, which can then be used in a variety of ways, discussed in depth in Chapter 4, to help clients make the necessary changes. In CBT, clients learn many techniques to help change distorted thinking. In DBT, clients are taught to accept themselves as they are, and then they learn tools to help them change behaviors that are unhealthy or problematic in some way. The therapeutic relationship, including therapist self-disclosure, becomes another tool that the therapist uses to help clients make these difficult changes. Having a relationship with a healthy, positive figure is especially important for clients who have problems regulating their emotions, as you'll see shortly when we look at the biosocial theory of BPD. Before we address the theory of how emotion dysregulation develops, however, we must first define emotion dysregulation itself. What is emotion dysregulation? According to Linehan, emotion dysregulation results from a combination of high emotional sensitivity or vulnerability and an inability to regulate or modulate one's emotions. Emotional vulnerability. Emotional vulnerability refers to a biological predisposition or temperament where an individual is born more emotionally sensitive than most people. These individuals have a tendency to react emotionally to things that others wouldn't typically react to. Their emotional reaction is usually more intense than warranted by the situation, and it takes them longer than the average person to recover from that reaction and to return to their emotional baseline. The idea of emotional vulnerability is similar to the concept of the highly sensitive person written about extensively by Elaine Aron. Aron believes that having a sensitive nervous system is a relatively common neural trait, claiming that approximately 15 to 20% of the population experiences this high level of sensitivity. Aron postulates that highly sensitive people are more easily aroused, reacting emotionally to things that others wouldn't typically react to, and over-aroused, experiencing a more intense reaction than is warranted by the situation. Blakesley and Blakesley support the idea that this higher emotional awareness has a neural, physiological basis. Further, Kerner and Demeff note that differences in the central nervous system have been found to play a role in making a person more emotionally vulnerable, and that these central nervous system differences could be related to a variety of factors, including genetics or trauma during fetal development or in early life. Inability to regulate emotions. Emotion regulation refers to the processes we use, unconsciously, consciously, or even perhaps with a tremendous amount of effort, to decrease, maintain, or increase an emotion or aspects of an emotion. Most often, we want to reduce the intensity of painful emotions or make them go away altogether if possible. But sometimes we actually want to increase an emotion. For example, someone who's feeling depressed may want to increase feelings of enjoyment. Both of these are considered emotion regulation. It's important to note that emotion regulation doesn't mean suppressing emotions or trying to hide them from others. In those cases, the emotion is still there and unregulated, although it may be hidden. Instead, the goal of emotion regulation is to achieve a balanced state of consciously managing the experience and expression of the emotion. People who are unable to regulate their emotions usually find it difficult to identify or put a label on the emotion they're feeling. to understand why they feel that way and to express the emotion in an effective way. As a result, they have a hard time tolerating the emotions they experience. Unlike the emotional vulnerability component to this equation, it seems that the ability to regulate one's emotions is more influenced by the environment a person grows up in. For example, Miller, Rathis, and Linehan point to research that suggests that early abusive experiences have a direct effect on people's abilities to regulate their emotions. On the positive side, this means that children develop healthier abilities to regulate their emotions when their parents respond to their expression of painful emotions in an accepting and supportive way. Likewise, Kuhl reports that children's ability to regulate their emotions is greatly influenced by the quality of their social interactions with caregivers. Kuhl also notes that people's ability to regulate emotions changes across the lifespan, continuing to improve with age. So the good news is that we can teach adults the skills they need to regulate their emotions if they didn't learn them as children. The biosocial theory of borderline personality disorder. Because Linehan originally developed her biosocial theory to aid in the understanding and treatment of borderline personality disorder, I will refer only to BPD in this discussion. However, at the end of this section, I'll take a look at 2 examples of how researchers are beginning to apply this theory to other disorders. According to Linehan's biosocial theory, emotion dysregulation, emotional vulnerability, plus the inability to regulate one's emotions stems from a biological predisposition and the individual's interaction with the environment. We've just looked at the biological predisposition, the emotional dysregulation component, and there is an abundance of research showing that some people are just born more emotionally sensitive than others. However, this doesn't mean that all people who are born emotionally sensitive will develop BPD or other mental health problems. This is only one part of the equation. The other part is the environment a person grows up in. Problems tend to arise when a biologically vulnerable person is faced with a pervasively invalidating environment. The invalidating environment. Miller and colleagues define an invalidating environment as one in which there is a tendency to deny or respond unpredictably and inappropriately to the child's private experiences, and especially to private experiences such as emotions, physical sensations, and thoughts, which aren't accompanied by evidence to prove that this is, in fact, the child's experience. In other words, when a child expresses an emotion, a private experience, the people in her environment judge her for this experience, for example, telling her that she shouldn't be feeling that way or that she's overreacting. Tell her that her experience is incorrect or minimize her experience. Punish her for talking about her experience, ignore her expression of the experience, and so on. In invalidating environments, the expectation is usually that the child should be able to control the expression of her emotions, which, because of the emotional vulnerability of the child, is unrealistic and should not express negative feelings. When she is unable to succeed in meeting these expectations, the environment punishes her for communicating these negative experiences and responds to her emotional displays only when she escalates, essentially teaching her to alternate between stifling her emotions and communicating emotions in extreme ways in order to get help. The other important piece about invalidating environments is that often the message is conveyed that the individual should be able to easily solve the problem she's experiencing. However, in this type of environment, skills such as emotion regulation and problem solving are never properly taught to the emotionally sensitive child. So the message is that she should be able to help herself feel better, but she has never learned skills for doing so. This obviously sets her up for failure and leads to self-invalidation. For example, telling herself everyone says she should be able to do this and judging herself when she can't. There are many ways in which an environment can be invalidating. The next 4 sections discuss some examples. The poor fit. Sometimes children are born into families in which they just don't fit properly. An example would be a creative child born into a family in which her parents and siblings are practical and hardworking and see her creativity as a waste of time, something that will never earn her enough money to be independent and therefore not to be pursued. Such parents may have their child's best interests at heart. They want her to succeed and to be happy, but they discourage her from pursuing her creativity because they don't think it's in her best interests. The emotionally vulnerable child will grow up in this invalidating environment, feeling that her desire to be creative is wrong and that there is therefore something wrong with her for wanting to pursue it. She will also feel misunderstood by and different from the rest of her family. The chaotic home. Some families have additional challenges that make it difficult for them to provide a validating environment. Perhaps the parents themselves were invalidated as children and therefore never learned how to provide validation for themselves or for others. Parents who have a mental health problem of their own or an addiction, or who are financially unstable and therefore have a hard time providing the necessities of life, will have a much more difficult time providing an emotionally safe and healthy environment for their children. It's also important to note that highly emotionally sensitive children can be the cause of at least some of the chaos in the home. Miller and colleagues note that just having an emotionally vulnerable child in the family can be so challenging that the family system becomes overstressed, possibly resulting in an invalidating environment. In other words, when an emotionally vulnerable child is born into a family where others don't share this trait, it's difficult for the rest of the family to understand, and this in itself can cause invalidation as parents become frustrated with the child and don't know how to help. We've all heard a parent telling an anxious child, "Don't be silly, there's nothing to be afraid of," telling a hurt child, "Stop crying," or telling an angry child, "You're not being very nice." These parents don't mean to invalidate the child. They're just feeling frustrated themselves and don't know how to effectively help their child in that moment. For an emotionally vulnerable child, however, over time, these messages add up to the idea that there's something wrong with her. The abusive home. Abuse doesn't have to occur for BPD to develop, but it's certainly not uncommon. For example, one study indicated that 75% of 12 hospitalized patients with a diagnosis of BPD had a history of incest. A chart review found that 67% of 12 psychiatric outpatients with BPD had a history of abuse in childhood or adolescence. And a qualitative study found that 86% of 14 hospitalized patients with BPD had experienced sexual abuse before the age of 16. An abusive environment is, of course, the ultimate invalidating environment. It can take many forms, from physical abuse in response to the child's expression of negative emotions or for the child's own good, to sexual abuse in which the abuser tells the child that it's okay but instructs her to not tell anyone, possibly threatening her or those she loves if she does tell. In addition to this invalidation by the abuser, many individuals experience further invalidation when they tell someone about the abuse and are disbelieved, accused of lying, and possibly even blamed for the abuse. Although neglect is a passive form of abuse, it can be just as damaging. With neglect, the child learns that no matter what she does, her needs, wants, and emotions will be largely disregarded, invalidated, unless, of course, she escalates her behaviors to the point that her caregivers can no longer ignore them. Other invalidating environments. While we generally look to the family and home environment to see where the problems lie, invalidation can also happen outside the home, at school.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?